Hi, everyone. It is Jeremy Benamy and Elon Goldenberg from Washington, D.C., and it is time for Word on the Street Live. It has been a while since Elon and I were in the same place on a Wednesday, actually doing the Word on the Street. Probably goes back a month now since we have been together doing this. So I'm really excited by that, Elon.
And we're back to our uniforms, although not exactly, since I decided to go with white today.
Yes, and I was commenting the wonders of the Israeli blue and white here that we are representing in our true pro-Israel J Street nature. So that is the colors. The color scheme is backing up our patriotism here. So
all right, we can do that.
All right, and we are really excited to be joined today for a wonderful conversation. I'm looking forward to a lot with Daniel Gordis, who is a Koret Distinguished Fellow at the Shalem College in Jerusalem. He was previously the vice president and chair of the curriculum committee there. He's an author of a dozen or more books and has a regular column and Substack. I see it sometimes in the Jerusalem Post. I see it in other places as well, Danny, but really recommend to folks in the J Street world to subscribe to your Substack, Israel from the Inside, which I think gives a great perspective. We don't agree on a lot of things on these issues, but I think it's really important to read and hear and listen to our different perspectives on this. And you and I, over the years, Danny, have tried to model how to have a constructive and civil dialogue across difference within the Jewish community, within the community that cares about Israel. And I've always really enjoyed that, and I'm really glad to have you here on the Substack with us.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks for making it possible. Thanks for the invitation. Really a delight.
So, I just thought it would be great, Elon. I know some of the folks in the JC world probably know Danny pretty well, but a lot of folks may not. And, your personal story of growing up in the States, making Aliyah, your introduction to Israel, your deep passion for Zionism, it's really a defining characteristic of who you are. And I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and a little personal background so people can get to know you a little bit.
Sure. Thanks. Well, once again, I want to thank both of you for the invitation to be with you. It's really, it's always been a pleasure to be in dialogue with Jeremy. As you may recall, back in the day, we actually brought Shalem students on a regular basis to meet with you. It was important for us that you be one of the people that they meet with. So, again, it's not about agreeing or disagreeing. It's about meeting smart people and bringing them to meet you. They met somebody very smart, somebody very passionate. So I'm delighted to be here. Basically, quickly, I grew up in Baltimore until the end of high school. With the exception, and this is not unimportant, with the exception of 2 years for 4th and 5th grade when I was in Israel. My parents made Aliyah in '69. And like that part of that huge wave of Americans who made Aliyah after the '67 war with the kind of euphoric sensibilities that were in vogue then, like many of them, they actually came back after a few years. I don't know the exact numbers, but well over 50% of the people that came back then didn't make it. This was a very, very different country. Back in the late '60s. I mean, you had to make an appointment to make an international call. It was very rough and tumble. If you were from the middle of the religious spectrum, which is where I define myself, there was really no place for you to actualize that. There were no liberal Orthodox communities. There was nothing like you have now, which is called, these partnership. And it was a very different country. Anyway, so my parents didn't stay, but I got here as a kid for a couple of years. And that obviously left a very significant, indelible mark, I would say, on who I ultimately became. Not necessarily positive, by the way, because I didn't like it here that much. So when I met the woman who would later become my wife, and I proposed actually in Jerusalem on our junior year abroad, that was my next time back here. I proposed at a place that's now the Eldon car rental place. But back then, it was actually it was a trendy bar. And we went out sometime between Christmas and New Year's, and I proposed, and I thought she was going to say, "Oh my God, of course, yes." And she said, "If we can live in Israel." And I was like, no. So that was actually, that night did not go the way that we thought it would, but here we are. So she got what she wanted. I got what I wanted, which was to be married to her. She got what she wanted, which was to live in Israel. We made Aliyah in '98. We came with 3 kids. They're now, 40, 37, 32, something like that. I'm getting that a little bit wrong, but something in that area. And we've had an extraordinary experience here since '98. We came originally on a sabbatical at '98, but then we stayed. Just professionally, I'll say I was mostly in the rabbinical school world in the United States, working primarily at what was then the University of Judaism and is now American Jewish University. which now has the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, and I was the founding dean of that, and it was a phenomenal place to be. It was phenomenal students. The only reason that I could possibly have imagined giving it up was to come here. And then I was with the Mandel Foundation for a long time. And then in 2007, I joined a group of colleagues and we founded Israel's first liberal arts college, Shalem College, where I am still, though, as the pilot likes to say, we have begun our initial descent to our final destination. So I'm a little bit less involved in the nitty-gritty day-to-day stuff, but very much involved with the students there. And that's me.
So Danny, and hearing that story, actually, I gotta say I can relate a little bit, only that my parents made Aliyah in 1975. So inspired by the Yom Kippur War, right? They were young Judea kids who, met at Camp Yehuda. Yeah. Oh, you were, there you go. Yes. And I also,
I'm the one. Yeah.
Did you do your course or, yeah?
I didn't do your course, but the three of us who were I think the people that actually drank the Kool-Aid my years was Alon Tal, who has been a member of Knesset and is a very important Israeli environmentalist, and Noah Efron, who's a professor at Bar Ilan. So those are two very successul guys who made Aliyah, and then I came along too. But Young Judea was a really important part of my upbringing.
No, for sure. And then, I was born in Israel and lived in Jerusalem till I was 8. And then they came back, they stayed for 12 years and then came back. But it's certainly why I'm here, and it's to find everything I've done professionally, and in my life. But Danny, let's move on and start having a conversation about what's going on now.
I can't talk about how I asked my wife to marry me in
Jerusalem
too.
Sorry, I like this.
No, I'm just kidding. We should dive in. That's enough the intros. But I also asked my wife to marry in Jerusalem, so I thought that was funny.
That is,
but not at a car rental agency. I'm just going to go on.
No, I'm the Tayalet overlooking the old city. It was,
that's the romantic way to do it. Okay,
I did it in an apartment in New York City, which is maybe as Jewish, actually. But Danny, why don't we start to move on to kind of discussing where we are today, because you really do focus in your Substack and your work a lot, really on Israeli society. And Israeli society is at a really kind of pivotal moment, especially, the war is, it's over. We still have a lot of challenges. Right, exactly. That's the question of exactly where are we? But maybe we'll just start with where do you think we are? What are you watching as we go into 2026 in terms of Israel?
And I think that is the key. That's the critical question. And in other words, Hamas isn't over, but we're going to win in some way, shape, manner, or form. Hezbollah is not going to come back to be what it is. Assad's not coming back to Syria. Iran is in deep trouble as we speak. We don't know exactly what the Trump administration is going to do or not do. And we don't know, as a matter of fact, whether if the Trump administration does something, we'll be spending perhaps even tonight in shelters. We don't know that. But Iran is also obviously limping very badly. I think the major challenges for Israel are the internal ones that you point to, Ilan. I think those are really the critical ones. And I think, let's talk about the good news first, right? I was just talking with somebody at work today. I'm going down tomorrow to the Negev to sit around a campfire. I know it sounds very Israeli, and it's hard to imagine now because it's raining here in Jerusalem. But I'm going down to the way down, right along, more or less along the Egyptian border, south of the Gaza envelope, because there's a group of students who graduated Shalem in years past, who, along with a guy named Roi Azizi, who's running an organization called Hinenu, they're all committing to move down there. They're leaving Tel Aviv, they're leaving Jerusalem, they're leaving the Galilee. They have little kids, they have jobs in Tel Aviv that some of them are just going to give up. And they're just a small group of a much larger movement of people that are actually moving south and moving north because they feel that's where Zionism needs them. It's a pretty extraordinary thing. It's hard to imagine a lot of couples with a young kid or two in the United States who are 30-something years old moving to, let's say, the southern border of the United States because they say it needs people like us to be here too, to offset whatever other influences there are. Just not something that people do in most other countries. And I think that's an example of something really extraordinary. We all have been talking for a long time now about the really, I think, unexpected and extraordinary character of this generation that we saw first on the 7th and then thereafter. And I don't mean only the soldiers, though I'm, of course, referring to the probably hundreds of thousands of soldiers who served over the course of the war, but them for sure. But also the people that ran the civilian command centers. The civilian command centers were up and running on Shabbat afternoon. I mean, even here in Jerusalem, which is a very sleepy town on Shabbat, it was already up and running on Shabbat afternoon, by the way, including by people who are Shomrei Shabbat, who are Shabbat observant. I mean, it really brought out the very, very, very best. People donated food and medicine and blankets and you name it. And we're schlepping people around. I mean, think about it. If you got evacuated from Be'eri sometime in the afternoon on October 7th, after having hidden with your kids in your safe room, and the army came and grabbed you and took you, they put you in some kibbutz. I think they first went to the Dead Sea, actually, from Be'eri. What did you have? You had exactly nothing. You had no credit cards. You had no money. You had no clothes. If you needed medicines, you didn't have them, and you couldn't go refill your prescriptions because you didn't have your medical card with you. I mean, people had literally nothing. When we get in the car to drive to the supermarket, we have with us in our pockets more than they had. They didn't have their phones, many of them. So there were people, very much already on that day doing extraordinary things. So again, we could go on about this. We've seen really extraordinary things. And I'll say also, by the way, even going back before the war, while the judicial reform, judicial overhaul, judicial whatever you want to call it, period in Israel was very problematic and very sad in many ways. And it's important to point out that the left and the right who were protesting were all carrying Israeli flags. And that's not just mere symbolism. In other words, again, I want to come back to a comparison with the States, but when you had these very, very left protests in Portland and Seattle and so forth, you did not see the protesters holding American flags. If anything, if you would put a microphone under their face, they would say something about America having lost its way or having even worse than that. I just don't want to say what they would have said. But so I think, look, we've seen a tremendous outpouring of devotion to this country. We've seen a tremendous outpouring in a younger generation that we were very cynical about, of real deep commitment, to the extent of obviously, hundreds and hundreds of them losing their lives. The devotion is the good news. The division is the bad news. And we've always been a very divided society. No party in any election in Israel's history has ever gotten, the 61 seats that you would need to make a government without a coalition. There's been coalitions since '49, when Ben-Gvir called the first elections. So in some ways we're very divided. In other ways we're a little bit less divided than we were before. But I think Israeli society is in fairly decent shape. I think Israeli politics is in terrible shape. I think that the political situation here is dire. I just interviewed somebody who said to me on the podcast that they think that this is the determinative election that we're going to have in 2026. And if it goes the wrong way, then it's very, very bleak. I don't actually agree.
Take a second and sort of define the right and the wrong side. I mean, if it goes the wrong, what's
the
wrong?
Right. So, the right side is people who agree with me and the wrong side is everybody else. No, but I mean, to be a little bit more serious than that, I'm not one of these people that has what, people call, Netanyahu derangement syndrome or Bibi derangement syndrome. I give him a tremendous amount of credit for having done extraordinary things over the course of his career, the way that he represented Israel, what he did to the economy here. I mean, Israel's economy is booming now, even in the face of huge debt because of the war, because of the privatization that Bibi put in place. I think for many years, even if I didn't agree with all of his policies, it was clear to me that he was a person who was very devoted to the Jewish state, that he cared deeply about the Jewish people and the country that he thought was critical to the Jewish people's future. And he and I could agree sometimes and disagree at other times about, what was necessary to do. I don't think that's the same Bibi anymore. I mean, I say this with a tremendous amount of sadness. I don't know him well enough to know what's going on inside. I don't know what he thinks when he puts his head on the pillow before he falls asleep. And I'm not even saying anymore that it's really just about, his political need to keep out of jail and the trial. That's part of it, but it's not all of it. There's no reason to take the son that you've exiled to Miami or that people say that he's exiled to Miami, just so we can all say out of jail and not get sued. And then nominate him to the Likud Central Committee. That's just silly. Or a few months ago, nominating him to the World Zionist Organization. That's just silly. That's not smart politics. That's not the master player Bibi that we used to know. He's making a lot of mistakes. There's different theories about why. Is he well? Is he unwell? Is he just too old to be doing this? I don't have any idea. But I think that he's lost the story. In other words, there are things here that are political. So we'll come back to this, I'm sure. But for example, the Jewish violence on the West Bank is a disaster. It's a moral It's a moral disaster for the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And the reason he won't shut that down is because he doesn't want to have a big fight with Ben-Gvir. Now, in fairness to him, by the way, no left-wing Israeli prime minister ever shut it down either. It's worse now than it was then, but it's happened under left-wing and right-wing governments.
It's a completely different
It's
level.
a new level. It's a new level. It's 100% a new level. And that I'll say he's probably, holding out on because of political reasons. There were certain things that he was right, by the way. I mean, it's very possible that if he had not stared down Biden and insisted that Israel was going to invade Rafah, it's very possible that we would not have those hostages back. Very possible. There are people who argue.
You might disagree.
Yeah. Again, you guys.
There are definitely different views about that, but we can.
Okay, I said it's possible. I didn't say that. I didn't say that it's the case. I said it's possible. And I think it is possible that the Hamas leadership really felt a tremendous amount of pressure that made them more susceptible to President Trump's pressure. I'm not saying that it is. I'm saying that it's possible. But he was able to, he's done some things in this war that have been good. He's done some things in this war that I think are very problematic. I'll just list what I think some of the problematic ones are and why I think he needs to go. He needs to go because we need to have a national commission of inquiry here. We had after Sabra and Shatila, and the way that we had after the Meron disaster when the stands collapsed and Haredim were killed who were there, the way that we had after the Yom Kippur War, most importantly, which led, of course, as he well knows, to Golda Meir's resignation. Ironically, the Kahan Commission didn't really hold Golda Meir accountable for the horrors of the war. They actually said she did a pretty decent job. Given what she was faced with, it's not her decision whether or not it should not be up to her to whether to call up the reserves on October 6th. Because what does she know? I mean, not because it's a she, just because she's the prime minister. She's not a person that has access to all of the military intelligence. But we need a commission of inquiry, and he's determined to not have it, so he needs to go because of that. He showed unbelievable sort of nuclear level callousness to the hostages and their families. It took more than a year for him to visit any of the kibbutzim that had been so ravaged. Most of us were down there, a few weeks later, harvesting and trying to help people pick avocados and plant, replant pipes is what my wife and I were doing for a while, replanting pipes that had been blown up and, whatever. It took him forever to go there. It was really reprehensible. Even if you were not going to go negotiate for their release because you thought it was bad for Israel, let's say, you had every obligation to go to those places and see the horror. You see the horror there. I could go on and on, but for Bibi, very much like the American president, by the way, in certain ways, sowing divisiveness inside the society is a way of keeping himself above the fray. In other words, he gets people fighting with each other. Trump is a master at this. Bibi's a master at this. It's just too much. He's been prime minister for almost 20 years straight. Bennett has said that if he is elected, which I think is a long shot, but we'll come back to that, Bennett has said that if he's elected, one of the first things that he's going to do is put in term limits. In other words, it'll obviously limit him also, but we got to have term limits here. 2 terms and you're out, just like in the United States. Some people here call it the French law. The French law is a little bit different, actually, as it plays out in France, but it doesn't matter. We need to have term limits. So when I say if it goes the right way, we need to have a government without Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are moral stains on the Jewish state, who are moral stains on the Jewish people. They are an embarrassment. They're not stupid, unfortunately, but they are an embarrassment to everything that I think, even among the three of us, of their disagreements, they are an embarrassment to everything the three of us love and care about, which is the Jewish
That's the exact language.
Fiber.
I mean, that language of moral stain is exactly the language that we've used.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I will say, Danny, I want to add one thing to the list of Bibi's kind of like, at least the big problems I have with him, especially through the conduct of the war, because I just can't help myself. And I think some of our viewers will have heard me say this before, but I was working at the White House like on October 7th and afterwards, and we were working on, like, I did a lot of work on these early post-conflict plans that involved how you actually replace Hamas with something different. And that involved from the beginning having plans for security, alternative security mechanisms, alternative governance. And we put ideas very similar to the ideas we're now talking about 2 years later in front of Israeli officials as early as November and December of 23. And we had, Mossad and, IDF, MOD, folks who wanted to have serious conversations with us, Shin Bet, who understood this was what we needed to do. And the order that they got from Bibi was, you cannot have these conversations because any pathway that goes down this way ultimately involves a viable, moderate Palestinian alternative to Hamas in Gaza, which starts to take you towards a potential Palestinian state. and things like that. And Netanyahu cut all that off, which I think did just grave harm to Israel's security. Is one of the reasons me, at least, after a couple months of support, turned against the war. So I wanted to throw that out there because that's why I personally opposed the Rafah operation, because I felt like at that point, there was no point. You could take Hamas out everywhere and you would still end up with no alternative. And without an alternative, it would continue to be there. So, and in my view,
I don't completely disagree. I mean, I obviously think that he should very much have. It looked terrible for Israel not to be willing to have the morning after conversation, even if there was no substance to it. It just looked terrible not to be in that conversation, especially when Biden said have the conversation and he said no. Now again, some of that's political, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and so on and so forth. But you can have the conversation and not give up anything, just be in the conversation and get a lot of points, or lose, let's say, a lot less points. Where you and I don't agree, I think, is on the viability of this idea of an alternative to Hamas that's Palestinian and moderate. I just don't think it's there, and we've always disagreed about this, and we still disagree about it. It was somebody today, I forget where I saw it, but Richard Falk, who is a kind of an esteemed professor of political science at Princeton. He's in his 90s. I mean, he's been retired for a very long time, but I mean, he is an extraordinarily.
By the way, he was my thesis advisor at Princeton 40-something years ago.
Yeah, he's an amazing, amazing man. But he was quoted today for what he wrote in 1979 about the Islamic Revolution as Khomeini was coming back to power. And he said, the people that are, frightened by this just don't understand. This is a fundamentally moderate, modern, egalitarian regime that wants to create economic, thriving for Iran. And he could not have been more wrong. He was 100% incorrect in how he read the Islamist movement there. And I think that there's just no evidence. I know that this is kind of, there's no evidence for God, or not let's say hard. There's no hardcore evidence. And I lived my whole life based on the assumption that God's out there. So we all have things that we base our lives on for which there's not a hell of a lot of evidence. But I think in this particular case, those people are still talking about a Palestinian state because there's moderate Palestinians out there are making an argument based basically not only on no evidence, but on only contrary evidence. There was no uprising in Gaza all these years, the way you see in Iran. Now, a lot of people have gotten killed in Iran. We're hearing 20,000 today. The number is probably much, much higher. And yes, there are 90 million people, and it's a smaller percentage. And I'm not saying that it would have been pretty if they had gone out to protest against Hamas. But I think that here I am, like most Israelis, I wouldn't say left and right because there's no left, but I would say like most Israelis, center and right, who really do not believe in the possibility of a viable two-state solution. Now you're going to then ask, well, then what do we do? We can have that conversation. But you and I just disagree, and that's totally fine. I mean, I think that's, people that care about Israel and that like to have decent, respectful conversations with each other ought to engage in this. But the bottom line is you and I just disagree about whether there's any evidence of a moderate impulse inside Palestinian society. I don't think there is. Abbas, on the other side of the country, obviously, is claiming that they've cleaned up the textbooks, but they haven't. The textbooks are still filled with, really disgusting things that you wouldn't say about your worst enemies, much less people living next door that you were supposedly trying to work a deal out with. I think there's just there's no evidence for it. And I just want to add one point, and then I'll pass the ball back to you, which is to say, and I don't mean this to be snarky in any way, so please just take it, at face value. There's really no snark intended. For us, it's much more than a political conversation. If we do the wrong, stupid thing, my grandchildren can get killed. And we've spent a lot of days and a lot of nights in bomb shelters with our grandchildren, sleeping on the floor, sleeping on the washing machine because there was not enough room in our tiny bomb shelter for our kids and grandchildren who don't have a shelter in their room, in their apartment, but live close by. So came by and spent the days of the Iran war with us in a tiny room that was beastly hot that we couldn't open. I mean, if we're wrong and if you think or you say that Israel ought to take a risk, and try something that most Israelis in their gut feel is not a smart risk, we're the ones who are going to pay the price. And I know, Ilan, you have family here in Jeremy, you have family here in Jeremy. You come from a long line of people who've been as devoted to the state as a human being can possibly be. So this is not in any way meant to trivialize or diminish in any way whatsoever the depth of your commitment to the Jewish state. It's just to say, we were wrong on October 6th. We were just dead wrong that we had them managed. We didn't think that they loved us, but we thought that we had them managed. I don't think there's very many Israelis who really believe in that moderate Palestinian impulse that you guys base your work on. And I understand, fully well-intended out of a genuine love of Israel. I understand that. Right. I don't question that for a second.
And, what is amazing is we're in 2026, and I think you and I first started doing public conversations about this probably 2008, 9, 10, it's almost 2 decades now. And I do think that this is the core of the exact same conversation. And, we've been at it for 2 decades. I'm sure this will continue, but that is the core. Elon and I both, in our different capacities, have worked with a whole range of Palestinians that, whether it goes back to the Salam Fayyad era or even today, I would say Mohammed Mustafa in Ramallah. We do believe that there is a very, very significant group of Palestinians who are aching to develop a viable state that protects themselves and is at peace with its neighbors and is focused on the future and building lives for their kids and their grandkids, and we really do believe that. And it is not the case that my kids, and one day perhaps I'll have grandkids too, will suffer physically directly. But where I want to take the conversation is what it does to the moral connection, the fiber of the Jewish community worldwide. Because I think in addition to on the bill of particulars against Prime Minister Netanyahu, in addition to some of the things that we've covered, I'd say one of the things that will be his legacy is that he's the man who broke the U.S.-Israel relationship. And the things that he did, both at a partisan level, by making Israel no longer a bipartisan consensus issue, but making it a partisan issue of division, but also, frankly, in the way that he approached the liberal majority of the American Jewish community and the non-Orthodox part of the American Jewish community, enabling a lot of language and a lot of actions that have seriously alienated a very large percentage of American Jews from not only him, but I would argue, unfortunately, alienated from the state of Israel, and in some cases alienated from Judaism itself because of the fundamental gap between the values that we've taught our kids are at the core of Judaism and what they see as some of the actions of the Jewish people. And so we do suffer a different kind of hurt here. I think it's a hurt to our Jewish community. I think it's a hurt to the Jewish future. I think it's a hurt to the cohesion of the American Jewish community's relations with others in America around issues that we do agree on, but now we're divided because of what Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and others are doing. And so I think there is a harm, but I don't want to equate it in any way to the dangers that face your kids and grandkids. But I do want to make it clear that I think there's a real negative impact by going down the road that says that there isn't a potential for the Palestinian people to build a future of their own.
Yeah.
So can I just pop in there for a second, Elon, before you go, or do you want to go ahead?
Different place I want to take it. Danny,
okay, no, I have to look. Of course, I couldn't agree with you more about Netanyahu's, making Israel no longer a bipartisan consensus issue. And his decision to go speak before a joint session of Congress when Obama specifically did not want him to do that, whether or not you loved Obama, irrelevant. Bibi should not have done that. It was a huge mistake. And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich agreed 100%. But again, in the interest of having a kind of a frank and brutally honest conversation, what I'll say to you is I think that a very large part of the American Jewish left is not comfortable with what I would call the tribal side of what Judaism is. It's become very much a religion. It's become very much universal. It's become whatever. And therefore, you could have had, the Pillsbury Doughboy being the prime minister of Israel. At a certain point, if we were going to pursue the war the way that we pursued the war or some version thereof, this was going to bring out the most tribal side of what Judaism is when you go there and wage war on a huge terrorist organization, and unfortunately, a huge terrorist organization that's purposely embedded itself in a civilian population, in hospitals, in schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do not want to give Bibi a pass on any of this. I don't. And I hold him accountable for everything that you do, except to say that I think the seeds of the break with Israel were planted by some of the anti-tribal, anti-peoplehood elements of Judaism in the Jewish left and center in America a very, very, very long time ago, and they've come home to roost. Again, Bibi has not helped, but I think we would have had this problem anyway. And again, one of the things that I think it's interesting for, that I think American Jewish people on the left, I don't mean you guys, but I mean, the rank and file, the kids on college campuses, or the young couples in their 30s or their early 40s, who are very much committed to the liberal agenda. And Israel's obviously for a very long time also had people with a very deep commitment to a liberal agenda. Women's rights. It's much better to be gay in this country than in your country. I could go on and on and on and on. Socialized medicine here works a lot better than Obamacare. I mean, we could talk about all that forever. But if I were one of those people, what I would say, a certain amount of intellectual honesty or modesty would make me ask myself, what do the Israeli counterparts to my part of society think? What are the Israeli counterparts to my liberal whatever? And you know what they think? They think they want their husbands home because their husbands are at war. A journalist came here in like November 23, right after it was a month and a half after the judicial stuff, but it was well into the war. And she called me, and it was actually very sweet. She said, I know that the war is now the thing, but I'm still interested in the judicial stuff, and I'm trying to find all the people who were leading the protest, and I just can't get in touch with any of them. And I said, because they're in cockpits, and they're in tanks, and they don't have their phones. In other words, the people here who are on the left were people disagreed here about whether or not to prosecute the war towards the very end, no question. And I think, again, reasonable minds can differ. I was of two different minds. The emotional side of me, frankly, that was worried about my son, who had been called up a number of times, and all of our friends' kids who've been called up. That part of me said, just get the hell out of there. Just stop already. It's just bad. I've been to too many damn funerals in this war. Enough. Part of me also said, though, until Zamir made it clear that he did not want to prosecute the war, I was conflicted. When it was Zamir who said very clearly, this is enough, we're not going to do it, and he really stopped doing it, even though Bibi told him to do it, then I changed my view. So I don't want to give Bibi any passes here, but I do think that the problem between American Jews and Israel has a lot to do with what American Judaism has become, which has nothing at all to do with how Israel has comported itself.
So I want to go back to one point on this, because I think what you're presenting really is which is where I disagree, is the view that Israel has no choice and it's tried this alternative and it hasn't worked, and now we have to go down the pathway and the policies that we have in terms of conduct of the war and in terms of how we engage the Palestinians. The reality is, like, really going back like 15 or 20 years, Israeli policy has been, we're going to empower Hamas. We're going to just kind of keep them quiet by, you give 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for Gilad Shalit. You give nothing for nonviolence. You work with Qatar and you push millions of dollars into Gaza to kind of keep them quiet. You starve the Palestinian Authority at the same time. You cut off their funds for their textbooks while you give Hamas money for launching rockets. And when you do that kind of strategy, you've had 15 years of systematically empowering and enabling the extremists in Palestinian society while weakening the alternative moderates. And then you end up with October 6th and October 7th, right? I mean, and so the counter argument would be, that when has Israel really tried? You could argue it tried during Oslo and that failed, but I think you actually started to see, even between 2007 and 2007 and 2009, in the early years, maybe even the early years of Netanyahu, you had Salam Fayyad, you had a systematic effort to start building a Palestinian, sort of the structures of a Palestinian state. And simultaneously, for a while, you had an Israeli government that wanted to support it. Israel has so much power over the Palestinians that Israel needs to play a conducive role in the money that goes in and the trade that goes in and all the things that can make it function. You can't have any Palestinian government succeed right now while literally Smotrich is holding half of their budget and not letting it go to them by holding their revenues. Like, there is no government in the world that could succeed if literally half of their revenues and half of their budget are being controlled. So the argument would be not take a risk, not, just go into this blindly, but maybe try a different strategy, for the next few years that tries to lead in this direction, that leans into normalization with, the Arab states, that leans into, trying to build this Palestinian alternative, that maybe that could work better. And that's the kind of case we are trying to make, certainly during the Biden administration. And we also thought it would have ended the war earlier and gotten the reservists out of Gaza earlier and helped Israeli society. And potentially could have gotten the hostages out earlier too. That's
there was nobody who was gonna. I mean, I've already made it clear. I'm not a huge Trump fan in a lot of ways, but there's not a single person on planet Earth who could have gotten the hostages out other than Donald Trump. Nobody. Mm-hmm. Precisely because he's so unpredictable. Precisely know that as the three of us are talking, we actually have no idea what America's going to do in Iran. We don't have. I mean, we really have just no idea. And the normal rules of war and the normal rules of conduct don't apply. That's, it's like the bully on the beach. You just don't know what he's going to do. And I'm not endorsing him. I'm just saying. So, Ilan, let me go back. See, here's the thing. I think that there's parts of what you're saying that I agree with. But then it becomes a package. And I want to kind of try to unbraid some of the parts of the package. So, again, there's nothing that you're going to be able to say that's going to get me to defend Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, or Bibi's handling of the West Bank. You're not going to. I mean, there's just no way. I completely agree. Where we disagree is whether Salam Fayyad represented a significant portion of Palestinian society or not. I know these guys, when they meet with people from the West, like to portray themselves as if they do. They never say the things that they say to you, to their fellow population in Arabic in print. They never, ever, ever do it.
So am I going? And we're back, everybody, from a quick. We're back from a very quick technical break there, and we're here with Danny Gordis, who's joining us from Jerusalem. And Danny, I think you are making a point that I think is very important, which is about how you perceive where Palestinian sentiment is at. And I want to let you make that point clearly. And then I know Ilan and I would like to have a chance to push back a little bit on that. So why don't you pick up where you were at before the break?
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. Look, I think, by the way, that it's not really where Palestinian sentiment is. It's where Islam is. That's the part that we don't get. This is a religious conflict. Again, as I was, saying to you before we had our little technical glitch, it's becoming a religious conflict among Israelis also. I mean, for Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, it's absolutely a religious conflict, and religious conflicts do not lend themselves to compromise. That's unfortunately true. And Israel needs to address this head on, because the more Israel moves to the right and the more Israeli officers, who are extraordinary people, don't misinterpret this, and moral people, and fight mostly honorably, but the more they are overrepresented in terms of the religious right, because they're the ones who want to serve. This will become a religious war more and more from Israel's side also. But at the moment when we're speaking now, it is absolutely a religious war from the side of the Palestinians. Now, here's the interesting thing. I don't know how many dozens and dozens of kids we've spoken to over the course of the last 2 and a bit years who've been in hundreds of Palestinian homes in Gaza as they've broken in. And we can have a very good disagreement about whether they should have done what they did in those Palestinian homes. Fair enough. But they say they've never, ever, ever been in a Palestinian home in Gaza that was not filled with Hamas literature. Now, if Hamas comes in and says, we're digging a tunnel in your daughter's bedroom, and nothing you can do because they're going to shoot you if you say no. But from what we heard from these people was that the amount of literature portrayed everywhere, displayed everywhere, was just kind of not that it was clear, or at least certainly looked like it was the worldview of these people. And I think where Israelis are, and I want to come back to the American-Jewish relationship in a second, then I'll let you go. Where Israelis are is they believe, we believe, I believe that a fundamental essence of Islamism in Palestine, Gaza, and the West Bank is a commitment to the destruction of the Jewish state. That's what we simply believe, that the people that go to mosques, which is the overwhelming majority of them, are committed to that in no uncertain terms. Now, you talked about what Bibi did, and I agree with you, to damage the relationship between American Jews and Israel and toxifying it, all of that. Sure. But I want to put out something else on the court for us to talk about, which is that when Israelis hear prominent American Jews talk about Palestinian moderates, what they say is These guys don't know what they're talking about. They're having the luxury of a conversation in DC or New York or LA or Boston or wherever the hell they're having the conversation. It's just not real. And the more we hear American Jews talking that way, the more we say to ourselves, they're not part of the conversation, because it just doesn't mirror the Islam that we live next door to. So again, I'm not justifying anything that Bibi did to make the relationship toxic, and that was very damaging. But I think there is also a cost here of talking about Palestinian moderation in a way that does not match what any Israeli that I know, and I know people all over the spectrum, what any Israeli I know thinks about the possibility of Palestinian moderates. Are there a few? Of course there are. Do they represent any meaningful slice of Palestinian society? I think they don't. And it's not because they're anti this or anti that. It's a fundamental, essential component of what Islam has turned into in the 20th century. And you saw it back with Arafat, and you've had Oslo, and you've had Madrid and all that between, but I don't think anything's changed.
So I do think that one of the fundamental differences that we have is our take on Palestinian society. And, I certainly think what we have across the world, and this is not just true of Palestine or Israel or the United States, this is across the world, is we have a fundamental battle right now between extremes and moderates. And the Arab world, the Palestinian society, Israeli society, American society, we are split between those who are more fundamentalist in whatever their belief might be. In some cases, it is a fundamentalist Christianity, right? In some cases, it is a fundamentalist Judaism. But whatever the case may be, the moderates of the world, I think, have our work cut out for us right now to try to work together to reinforce each other and to make the choice that the up and coming generation in each society sees is that there is one future that is being directed by a moderate stream that is giving them opportunity, giving them a future, giving them hope. And there's another future that is giving them the perpetual religious war, living by the sword, being the super Sparta. This is the fork in the road that all these societies are at. And I think our view is that there are, literally, I have met with 100 or more Palestinian groups and probably many hundreds of Palestinians who are involved in them. And there are thousands and tens of thousands involved in them who really want to build a moderate, peaceful society. They are not fundamentalist Islamists. They are not even religious necessarily. I mean, there's a real secular nationalist thread throughout Palestinian society, and there's been a battle within Palestinian society between the secular nationalists and the fundamentalist Islamists. And, you look at the polling from somebody like a Khalil Shikaki, who I assume you know, and I assume that you have some level of respect for. But he would say that the natural base of Islamist support in Palestinian society across Gaza and the West Bank is roughly 30%. And I look at Israeli society, and I look at American society, and I say, there's probably about 30%, radical fundamentalist in all societies. But for Israel, like a prime minister, whoever it is, the next prime minister, their choice is, do I do things that are within my own control that give hope and a path forward to the moderates to build an alternative that can live next to me in peace? Or do I take steps that are only going to defeat hope and extinguish hope and lead the 3 and the 6-year-old grandkids who don't have a bomb shelter, down in Gaza, or who are on, the West Bank villages that are getting eradicated by these crazy settler youth that I know you.
Well, there's no villages that have gotten eradicated. Let's not overstate it. No villages.
Well, I've been to villages that have been eradicated. I mean, there really have, and I'm happy to go with you. We're coming next month. I'll join us, and I'll show you the villages that have been wiped out.
I would be not happy to, but I would be pleased to have.
Yeah, no, we should really. You've got to see it. You have to see it.
I've been to some, and I'm happy to go with you if I'm around, for sure.
Yeah, but that, the choice is, do we give people hope, or do we force them to live in abject fear and occupation and have really no reason to live? That's why they join these groups, that the only option is they're going to become a martyr, is because they actually have nothing to live for. And I think that's the choice for Israeli leadership in the next government is, do you build hope or do you build fear and desperation?
Can I also throw one other point in here, which is a little bit different, but I think similar, which is, I think Israelis look at American Jews and they see naivete when talking about Palestinians. I think a lot of American Jews look at Israelis and they see blindness when they look at Palestinians from the Israeli side. And I'll give you just a small vignette. I took a trip to Israel a few years ago, not with J Street, actually with a different organization, but we had this tour company that we're using for some of our logistics, and we're going into the West Bank, which is not something they're used to doing. And I was driving around Ramallah, where I've been many, many times, and I'm very comfortable with. And I look next to me, and the woman who's kind of she doesn't deal with these issues. She's horrified. She's just looking around terrified. And she's like, I'm like, why? She's like, I haven't been here ever or in 25 years. Like, there's been this separation of societies. I actually think in many ways, Americans who work on these issues end up interacting with Palestinians and with Palestinian society a lot more than Israel has. And that's been true. That hasn't always been true, right? I mean, when I was a kid growing up in Jerusalem,
it's always been true.
Although when I was growing up in Jerusalem, we could go have, we would go into Ramallah for lunch. You know what I'm saying?
Like, when I lived in Israel, we would go down to Gaza on the weekend.
Palestinians more than Israeli Jews have. In large measure, first of all, because Israelis aren't allowed to travel by the government. So, and that's not because the government hates Arabs. That's because the government doesn't want to have to extract us if we get kidnapped. I mean, let's just be honest. That's just what the situation is. Look, I think you're right. I think when American Jews look at Israel, they see some sort of blindness, and when Israeli Jews look at American, they see a certain amount of naivete. I think that's a very fair assessment. I'll say I'm not optimistic about this relationship between the two Jewish communities on the opposite sides of the ocean, and that breaks my heart. It's not like I'm saying, oh, I don't think it's who cares? You guys do your thing, we'll do our thing. I think that's a disaster for us. But the fact that I think that something is bad doesn't mean it's going to not happen. In other words, there's a lot of things that I think are terrible, but I don't want them to happen, but they might. I think we're heading potentially for a very, very big break, because I think that the universalist, non-tribal dimension of American liberalism has become a non-negotiable religious tenet of the Judaism that is now foundational to a lot of young American Jews in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And it doesn't sit well with nationalism at all, and certainly nationalism at war. Okay. I mean, not okay in the sense that I don't care. Okay. But I can't not go to war because it's going to make a lot of people on the west side of Los Angeles deeply unhappy. I can't not go defend myself because people on the Upper West Side are going to get pissed off. With all due respect, I got to defend my kids and I got to defend my grandchildren. And, I'm too old to defend anybody. But when my son goes off to war, that's what he's doing. So we don't disagree. I actually think that there's a tremendous tendency to paper over the depth of the profound disagreement between these two communities. And I understand the reason to paper it over is to leave hope that there's a relationship. And the reason not to paper it over is because until you're honest about the depth of the problem, you can't really begin to address it. It's sort of like, God forbid, in a marital situation. First, you got to put everything on the table. What's making people miserable? If everybody's being nice to everybody, you're still miserable. It doesn't do any good. So I don't really disagree with you about that. We really just completely disagree about Palestinian moderation. And here's what I would say. Let's leave Israel out of the picture for a second. Let's go to Paris, or let's go to London. And let's ask your typical Londoner or your typical Parisian how many moderate Islamist voices or Islamic voices they have heard in London or in Paris. And the vast majority of them will tell you that they're scared to go in those neighborhoods, and they've heard what's said on the mosque, so that's what gets portrayed and whatever. And they don't know any moderate Muslims, any moderate Muslims in Paris or in London or and so forth. Now, if you want to say that the Islam, just give me one more thought and I'll pass the ball. If you want to say that the Islamist base is only 30%, okay. But Shikaki's data also shows that the support for Hamas in Gaza and on the West Bank at this very moment is double that. It's much higher than 30%. In other words, he's shown a support for Hamas that's much higher than the size of the base that he says is fundamentally Islamist. And at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't really make any difference that 60 or 70% of Israelis wanted the war to end at a certain point. They couldn't control it. The war ended when Trump made Bibi stop the war. And the same thing is true in Palestine, whether it's Gaza or the West Bank. It doesn't really make any difference anymore what 30-40% of Palestinians think. Those people have no power, and those people have been unable to hold onto power, and those people have been unable to sway the young masses in Palestinian society. What Israel has to deal with is not what do people think about in the privacy of their bedrooms. Israel has to deal with what the people get up and do in the morning in terms of this conflict. And the reality is that the people that you're talking to, even if you're right that there are tens of thousands of them, and I'm dubious, but let's say even if you're right, they just have no power. They will not determine the course of this conflict. Israel has to conduct the conflict in a way that addresses what do the Palestinians in control of Palestinian society want to happen, and what do they actually do.
Just a couple of things. One is I do think rather than going to Paris or London, it'd be good to go to Abu Dhabi, for example, or even Riyadh, where you have governments that are, and actually societies that are really moving away from, like, that are showing that there are models that you could use that are not Islamist models in the Arab world, that are moving to these other positions. And so I think you'd have to, like, you can go look at numerous different societies before you kind of draw this conclusion. I think is
really too broad a brush. I mean, that's, I think, one of the things that I would just
say anything about the UAE, and I didn't say anything about Bahrain. I agree with you about there. Palestinian society is Islamist. The UAE is not Islamist. Palestinian society, in societies where Islamists are in charge, there is no moderation, period.
But those societies have evolved over time also, and part of the reason they've evolved over time is the policies of their leaders, but also the external power that comes from, and in terms of Shikaki, I mean, first of all, I don't think the numbers are actually as high as 60% right now. They've come down. They were in the aftermath of October 7th,
right after that,
but they've actually come down pretty significantly. But again, like you say that the moderates, and we don't need to go in circles on this, but we say that the moderates don't have power, but then we also have Israel is the most powerful actor in the area, and if it's choosing a policy that systematically weakens moderates and empowers extremists, which are many of the decisions Israel makes, goes in that direction. Sometimes by mistake, and sometimes because it feels like it needs to defend itself, but sometimes on purpose because it serves the interests of people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir.
100%. We agree about that. I think we've plowed this field. We agree.
Yes, exactly.
We agree about, and we disagree about what we disagree about.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and I think it's really important that, we have these conversations. This is one of the things that we want to do on Word on the Street. We want to make sure that we are bringing into the conversation. We did a conversation with Peter Beinart, right? I know we can go down a whole road about him, but we talked to Peter, we talked to Ben Rhodes, we talked to
Dan Shapiro.
We're trying to spread the wealth here and have these conversations so that the audience that is concerned about these issues can hear a variety of perspectives, and I think that's really important. I think our disagreements are pretty clear, and I do want to maybe sort of wrap us back towards the end with a question that to me is the most important about the future, which is that I come to all of these questions with at least a glimmer of hope. And I come with the hope that in 1948-49, I don't know that the founders of the State of Israel could ever have imagined that much of the neighborhood would actually want to achieve normalized relations with the State of Israel, to find a way to cooperate on security matters, cooperate economically, to integrate into a regional cohesive bloc that has a common set of interests. And I think in 2026 and beyond, the amazing opportunity that exists for the State of Israel as a national home of the Jewish people is that most of the Arab world is ready to accept that state and to normalize the relationship and to actually find those common grounds. And so we call it here the 23-state solution. As J Street, and I don't know, you and I have had a conversation about this yet, but we don't use the term two-state solution anymore because two states isn't really the answer to the question. The answer is, how does Israel settle the Israeli-Arab conflict, right? How do we actually get the Arab states bought in on the security questions that plague Israel about what happens with the state of Palestine? How do those Arab states become part of the solution? How do they become part of the nation building of a state of Palestine that actually wants to live at peace with its neighbor Israel? And that will only happen on a regional basis. And so I see in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in Riyadh, in capitals across the Arab world, a real thirst to find a pathway here. And to me, that's an opportunity for the next Israeli government. I'm curious if, despite all the things that we put on the table where we do disagree, whether you can see that pathway and think that that might be a potential way out of all of this.
Look, I would love for you to be right. I would have a better life. My grandchildren would have a better life. And I say the following quite seriously. There's a higher likelihood that my kids would stay here if you were right. I mean, I would love for you to be right. And here's the great irony. When I walk the streets of Abu Dhabi, which I do periodically, I wear my kippah on the street. When I take the subway in New York, I don't. That speaks volumes about a whole lot of things. Abu Dhabi is a fairly modern site. By the way, they've shut down some of the kosher restaurants in Abu Dhabi on purpose since the beginning of the war to make a point to the parts of their population that they have to appease, that they know what's going on in there, et cetera, et cetera. But even so, there's more kosher restaurants in Dubai than there are in Boston, for example, or Baltimore. It's kind of amazing. Maybe not Baltimore, but certainly Boston, because I spent some time in Boston over the past few years, and there's not a lot. I wish you were right. And I think you're right about Dubai, and you're right about, obviously, the UAE. You're right about, Bahrain to a certain extent. You're right about what Saudi Arabia may one day become. That's all true. We don't have borders with them. The people who cross the fences are not them. The people who cross the fences and rape and pillage with GoPros and put it on what was that platform that they used, Telegram, etc. They're not the Emiratis, and they're not the Saudis, and they're not really even the Jordanians. And the Egyptians so far are mollified to a certain extent. I wish I could agree with you. I wish I could. And that's what I think. I hope our listeners understand. This isn't a conversation between one table of people that want peace and a different room across the ocean of a guy that couldn't care less about whether or not there's peace. Yeah. No, that's not the issue. The issue is, what do I really, at the end of the day, when I look myself in the mirror and say, what do I really believe is real? What I really believe is real is that it's very hard to make a deal with Islamists. Now, I think it's actually impossible. Let me just I'll tell you one anecdote, and then you guys can, wrap it up with whatever symphonic flourish, comes to mind. There's a woman that, and I, two quick points. Number one, and I can't prove this, but I promise our listeners that this is true. I am pretty typical of Israelis right now on this issue. There are very few Israelis who agree with you, and not because I'm so smart or right or anything special, but the vast majority of Israelis think like I do or to the right of me. That's just, I mean, as my grandmother would say, das ist nicht nur emes, das ist Effekt. If you speak Yiddish, you get it. If you don't, you don't. I'm going to share one anecdote that I think really kind of captures where Israeli society is. And I tell you this anecdote very painfully. And there's some from my own family that I won't share, but I was meeting with a woman in Tel Aviv not long ago. She's super involved in trying to help some of the victims of October 7th. By profession, she's in the finance world, but she's taken on an enormous project, and it's a beautiful project, and she's crazy smart, and it's doing good things. I admire her, so we got together for lunch in Tel Aviv, and she tells me the following thing, very quick. She goes, I'm a lefty. I'm a Tel Aviv secular lefty. In fact, she says, during the first Pesach of the war, we didn't make a Seder. I just felt like, who's going to talk about freedom when this is happening to the Palestinians? Like, that's where she's at, okay? And so this gives you a sense of who this person is. She said, and so I told my kids when they were in high school, I don't care if you want to learn Arabic. You're going to learn Arabic because they live next to us, and you have to know how to understand them. They're going to hopefully learn Hebrew, but you're going to learn Arabic, whether you want to or not. So she said, all my kids learned Arabic. And because my kids learned Arabic, when they went to the army used them for things that they needed Arabic for. So she says, my youngest one, who's the son, who's still in the army, he says what he does all day in some unit, not 8200, I don't know what unit it is, he listens to a lot of Palestinian conversations, phone conversations. And she told me, with actually her eyes moistening up, she said her kid came home from the army, and he said, Ima, stop talking to me about all that bullshit about, innocent Gazans. They don't exist. I'm not saying he's right. He said, they don't exist. I am sick and tired of you talking about things that are from La La Land. I spend all day long listening to this, and I'm telling you, they all hate us. Now, after she told the story, and I really condensed it, I said to her, do you think he's right? And she said, of course he's not right. He's not listening to random conversations. He's listening to the conversations they told him to listen to, because those are the people that they're worried about. Of course he's not right. And then she said, but that's what I get for making my kid learn Arabic. And I think that the divide between that woman who is a little bit younger than me, but more or less my generation, and that kid in the army who's a little bit younger than my kids, but more or less that generation, that kid is where Israeli society is at. And Israelis would like to believe that the world that you see through the lenses on your glasses was the world that they saw, but they don't see it. And at the end of the day, Israelis are going to elect people. And Bennett is not about to go establish, any 23-state solution or anything of the sort. He's going to do better things, I think, if he's elected, which I think he won't be. But I hope he will, but I don't think he will be. I like him a lot personally, very, very much. I think he's a very good person. But that's neither here nor there. The problem is that I, now speaking half American, half Israeli for just 1 second, the part of me that grew up in suburban America wants so desperately to be able to see the world the way that you do. And the part of me that's lived half my life here and has lived the last 2.5 years here, especially, doesn't have any capacity to see the world the way that you do. And that just leaves me brokenhearted. But I think what the moment calls for, brokenhearted or not, is just abject honesty. And that's what I think we've both three tried to do during this conversation, which I very much applaud you're doing, whether it's Peter Beinart or me or Dennis Ross or anybody else. I can't applaud you enough for doing it.
Well, and with that, I think, Elon, we do need to wrap things up. It actually has gone a little longer than we usually do, but it was a fascinating conversation, and I hope that our regular audience finds this as interesting as I just did. And I think it's vital, this listening to each other, understanding what you just presented about Israeli society and the perspective of generational difference there. For those of us who care so deeply, if we don't understand this, then we're not going to be able to engage productively. And I think this is the value of the conversation. It's not whether I'm right or you're wrong or whatever. It's that we have to understand where each other is coming from. There's so much more we could have discussed and so much more we could have dived into. I have a whole series of things I would love to go for a second hour, but we're not going to do that to our folks. And it's also getting late for you. And so I appreciate eating into your time with your grandkids and with dinner time. And I want to say thank you to Daniel Gordis for joining us from Jerusalem. I hope that listeners of Word on the Street Live enjoyed this. I want to remind folks that we have a national convention coming up in about a month and a half in Washington, D.C., starting February 28th. Please go online to jstreet.org/convention, because if you come to Washington for a couple of days, you will get a whole dose of conversations along these lines, with these issues being, plumbed at depth with Palestinians, with Israelis, with American Jews, with international players and actors, American politicians and others. I think it's going to be a great couple of days, a really vital year for the Jewish people, really vital year for America, for Israel, for Palestine. So thank you again. Elon, any final words?
No, just thank you, Danny. This is really one of my favorite conversations that we've had so far.
It's great talking to you guys. What we all three share is a love for Israel and the desperate desire for Israel to have a glorious future. We may not agree about how we handle the present moment, but it's great to be in touch with people who care so deeply, and I look forward to thanking you in person.
All right.
Great.
All the best. And we'll follow up on, coming with us on this trip. I would love for you to see some.
If I can do it schedule-wise, I would be delighted.
All right. Terrific, Danny. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.